Between May and September 2019, the Headford Environment Group held 6 walking wildlife workshops. They wanted to reintroduce people to their local biodiversity in Sandybanks Lane, Headford.
I just wanted to thank the Headford Environment Group for inviting me here today because it's always a great start to a weekend when I get to talk about bees.
The first walking wildlife workshop was on bee identification. It was led by the inspirational Michelle Larkin. It was attended by 25 people. Michelle took us through the life cycle of bees, how to distinguish them from each other, and those we might expect to find at Sandybanks Lane here in Headford.
It's very long and shiny black.
We walked down Sandybanks, and Michelle expertly netted a few specimens for us to view. The common carder bee was the most prevalent species.
It's a pollen basket.
That's the pollen basket.
Pollen basket.
Have a look at them, take plenty of photos and then let them off. That's the best way to be able to identify them.
It is important for us to nurture our hedgerows and grass verges to ensure the viability of our pollinators, and we now have renewed enthusiasm for this. One idea being explored is to set up a monthly bee walk and post our findings to the National Biodiversity Data Centre database.
We record that and you can have the data available that we can actually put into management plans.
We had a wonderful workshop on living with butterflies, led by Chris and Lynda Huxley.
The chances of seeing this are actually quite remote. It's far and away the most attractive of our small butterflies. It has an iridescent purple sheen to it.
Chris gave a presentation on the different types of butterflies we might find in Ireland, and more specifically ones we might come across in the West. We then went down to Sandybanks. The rain held off, but it was a bit overcast, not good butterfly watching weather. But we netted a few whites and browns. The brightly coloured reds and the blues had been seen earlier, but were obviously tucked away, waiting for the sun to come out.
Does anybody want to have a closer look, or can I let him go?
You can tell.
We need to plant more pollinator-friendly plants, such as knapweed, hawksbit, meadowsweet, wild marjoram and bird's foot trefoil, not forgetting food plants for caterpillars, alder, willow, holly, nettles, wild rocket, and hedgerow species such as hawthorn, bramble and wild rose. Our Know Your Wildflowers workshop with Elaine showed the value of leaving grass verges to grow. It allows species which would otherwise be cut back before flowering to flower and produce valuable food for insects as well as cover. The more wildflowers we have, the more mammals and insects. The workshop was attended by 26 people, including 6 children. The weather was mixed but didn't dampen the enthusiasm. As well as identifying wildflowers on the walk, Elaine also talked about the folklore surrounding some species and their historic healing properties. We saw plenty of bees, a damselfly and frogs in the wildflower meadow. We were encouraged to record our finds on the National Biodiversity Data Centre database. It will be worth going down on a regular basis to see the changes that take place during the year. Our Walking Wildlife workshop, The Secret Life of Small Mammals, was a huge success. 35 people turned out despite the rain. Ruth Hanniffy of Vincent Wildlife Trust led the workshop, and we looked at specimens of otter, pine marten and Irish stoat.
Otters are doing particularly well in Ireland compared with across Britain and Europe, and they can live along the coast, but they need access to fresh water to keep their coat clean and to be able to clean off the salt water. Pine martens are woodland specialists. They're most at home in woodlands, although in Ireland they're doing well in the burn.
They use Longworth live traps to survey for small mammals like bank voles and wood mice. And Ruth talked about their ecology and conservation.
We have another creature. So this, as you can see, is a little bit different. This is called a bank vole.
We learned how to detect signs of wildlife through the type of food found, nuts, cones and berries, and the way it is eaten.
In Ireland, they're incredibly important in the diet of barn owls, stoats, pine martens, kestrels, buzzards, long-eared owls.
We were treated to the sight of trap after trap revealing a wood mouse or bank vole, which we could have a close look at.
So it's another wood mouse for anyone who didn't get to see one before. So you're probably getting familiar with them now, the large ears, the large hind feet, the long tail, and actually if a bird was to grab it by the end of the tail, it could lose the end of its tail to save itself, and then the end of the tail would grow back again. So, ooh, what would you like to call this one? Martin. Oh, so we said bye to Bob, and now we've got Martin.
After being named by the children, they were released and disappeared into the long grass.
So this is Jack, the bank vole.
Sandybanks Lane had excellent numbers of small mammals because of the long grassland hedgerows and wild verges, which have been left unmown as part of the All-Ireland Pollinator Plan. We had a brilliant morning inspecting the wildlife in the stream at Sandybanks with Lally, a lecturer in freshwater ecology at GMIT.
These guys are really important because these are an indicator of good water quality.
After a quick run-through of aquatic insects we could expect to find,
These are caddisflies. You hear lots of fishermen refer to them as sausages.
we were enthusiastically assisted with our kick sampling by the younger members of the community.
Now, we have a look and see what we got. Oh my goodness. Wow.
It was amazing to find so much wildlife in the water.
There's kind of that myth that they only live for an hour or two, but they actually live for a couple of days.
The quality of the water was found to be reasonably good, and it is hoped that students of Lally at GMIT will come out and carry out a more scientific appraisal when time permits. Water quality is also indicative of the health of our biodiversity. Our final workshop with Dr. Janice Fuller, consultant ecologist, looked at the value of trees and hedgerows for our wildlife. We explored the benefits of preserving and increasing our hedgerows for our wildlife and flora. This is how Janice described Sandybanks. The Sandybanks River Walk in Headford has a nice stretch of hedgerow, tree line, dry stone wall and grassy verges along its length. The hedgerow has a mix of species including hawthorn, blackthorn, ash, sycamore, grey willow, elder, gorse and wild rose. The grassy verge along the road is a nice meadow habitat, which is of huge value to pollinators. Some of the wildflowers present are knapweed, bush vetch, meadowsweet, angelica, and devil's bit scabious. Grassy verges should be cut once a year at the end of the growing season in September. The clippings to be removed if possible to be composted elsewhere. The riparian zone, the riverside vegetation, should be left uncut as it is an important buffer zone for the river. This was a really informative morning. The 6 walking wildlife workshops at Sandybanks Lane in Headford were a new hands-on way to learn about our biodiversity and were extremely informative and enjoyable. We hope that this format can be replicated in other areas.